Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen Center for Thought and Culture online. I'm David DeSerto, Interim Executive Director here at the Sheen Center. The Sheen Center is an initiative of the Archdiocese of New York to engage, to elevate, and to evangelize culture through the arts and thoughtful discourse. As always, I ask you to like us on Facebook, subscribe to our Sheen Talks YouTube channel, and click that bell icon for future notifications. Today's very special guest needs no introduction. Without him, there would be no Sheen Center. He is the Archbishop of New York, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, and he will be talking about his new book, I Am With You, Lessons of Hope and Courage in Times of Crisis, available from Loyola Press. Joining him in today's conversation is Catherine Jean Lopez of the National Review Institute, who wrote the afterword to the book. Welcome, Cardinal Dolan. Welcome, Catherine.
Hi, Dave.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Cardinal Dolan, for making the time to do this.
Thanks for the invitation, Catherine. I never pass up a chance to enjoy your good company. Thank you.
Well, it was a blessing this morning to be able to actually be present at St. Patrick's Cathedral when you consecrated the Archdiocese to St. Joseph. Happy St. Joseph's Day.
You got it.
And it was not lost on me that, a year ago was when the churches were closed and we couldn't be together in the same place. And this book, I'm really grateful exists because I have to thank you, Cardinal Dolan. I haven't done this in quasi-person. These homilies and these columns were so important to me. They were, Pope Francis loves that word accompaniment, and you were doing that. I remember last, actually it was my birthday. It was my first Sunday Mass, first Sunday without a Mass. And you said, we just had an accident, didn't we? We need a little Easter right now. And I think a lot of people are feeling like we still need a little Easter. It feels like we've had one long Lent this last March to March. Are you feeling that a little bit?
Oh, am I ever. And you know what? First of all, Catherine, thank you for your gracious words. Thank you for doing the afterwards. And thanks to you, Dave, for our excellent Fulton J. Sheen Center for Thought and Culture and to the National Review Institute. I really appreciate your initiative and the invitation. I'm just so grateful when people pay attention to anything that I say or write. So, yeah, Catherine, one of the things that strikes me about this year is that we keep saying over and over again with the psalmist, how long, O Lord, how long? You had commented in your opening remarks of when is this going to end? It seems like one terribly lengthy Lent. And it does to all of us. The human person seems able to withstand any kind of adversity if we know it has a purpose and if we know it's going to end. That's part of the wisdom of Christianity, of our faith, in that we know that suffering and adversity has a purpose, namely it's redemptive if we unite it with our Lord on the cross. And secondly, it's going to end with God's intervention either here or in eternity. All right. And that gives us strength to persevere through suffering. But the human person often says, how long, oh Lord? My dear mom, who's 92 and in an assisted living, she's in good health, thank God, but in an assisted living, she hasn't been able to see anybody. And even though she's been remarkably free from a dreariness or complaining or feeling sorry for herself, she does periodically say, how long is this going to go on? When is this going to end? And remember, Catherine, we kept getting false promises. And no, I'm not blaming anybody. We all did our best. But remember when this started, and March 14th was the actual date. I thought of that the other day, St. Patrick's Day, because we weren't able to have, nobody was at Mass on St. Patrick's Day morning. And there was no parade. But then we said, well, we thought, what are we going to do for Holy Week and Easter? And we thought, okay, let's wait a while. It may let up by then. Then we thought, summer is going to bring an end to it. Forget it. What are we going to do for the opening of school? Well, maybe by Christmas we'll be together. It kept going on. And I think I think that "How long, O Lord," was a chorus that echoed all over the planet. We're in good company, though, because if you're familiar with some of the most effective celebrated prayers that we have in the vocabulary of the faithful are the Psalms. Those are inspired prayers by God, and they're the prayers of the people of Israel. So we know they're good ones. These are prayers that Jesus himself knew by heart, that his mother knew by heart, that his foster father, St. Joseph, knew by heart. So the Psalms are effective prayers, and very often in the Psalms, we hear the psalmist say, "How long, O Lord? How long? All right, we know you're in charge. We know we're going to get through this, but how long is it going to take?" Okay, and that's what we've been saying, Catherine. So you haven't been alone at all in saying this seems like one long Lent. 40 days is long enough, if you ask me, without a beer and a cigar. But a year.
Thanks for reminding me, Cardinal Dolan, that the Psalms, of course, are in the Liturgy of the Hours, the prayer of the church. And when I couldn't be present at Mass, they were such a consolation, because there's like every emotion on the planet in the Psalms, you know, no agony it doesn't speak to.
It's a smorgasbord of emotions. And Catherine Jean, talk about this. Let's talk about this. And I bring it up in the little book that you're kind of highlight today. The Psalms and the people of Israel were not afraid to complain to God. They were not afraid to call him out. When you see what Moses did, when you see what Abraham did, when you see what the prophet, "You duped me, Lord." All right. So the people of Israel were not afraid to bargain with the Lord, to say, "Lord, wait a minute, this doesn't seem like you promised. What'd you get us into here? We're trying our best to keep our end of the covenant. How about you?" We're kind of reserved about that. And I think I know a lot of people, because they would confer with me and they say, "Sometimes I'm just getting mad at God." And I'll say, that's not bad. Turn that into a prayer. As long as we start with an act of faith, namely, "Lord, I'm going to say, I'm at the end of my rope, and I'm going to say some tough things to you, but I'm saying to you because I know you're there, and I know you're listening, and I know you love me, and I know you know me better than I know myself." And at the end, so then say anything you want, gripe away, okay? He's not only the Lord of the universe, he's our best friend. And then at the end, say, "Thanks, Lord, for listening. You know me better than to think I want to offend you, but please help me work this out." And there's that beautiful prayer that we say, "Lord, it doesn't seem to be making much sense with you, but it makes absolutely no sense without you." Sort of a paraphrase of that saying of St. Peter, when, "Lord, to whom else shall we go? You and you alone have the words of everlasting life." I've always wondered, Catherine Jean, if St. Peter was kind of shrugging and saying, because remember Jesus said, are you all going to leave me too? And I can picture Peter shrugging and saying, "Lord, most of the time we don't understand what you're saying either. And you've got some terribly tough teachings that we wish we could talk you out of. So sometimes we get frustrated with you and don't understand you. But you know what, Lord? To whom are we going to go? You, and you alone have the words of everlasting life." That prayer coming from times of trial and adversity, I think, is particularly potent.
And one of the reasons I'm glad this book exists is one of the things about this year is, which you write about in this book, it could be a mercy if we take the right lessons from it. And it does seem like God was stretching us and challenging us in this last year. And one of my fears is that, with people getting used to virtual Mass and things, will people come back? one of the things that you've talked about is how people have expressed their longing for the sacraments, and what a great grace that is. That we were, I used to say that I would die without confession and the Eucharist, and wow, it is really hard to live without confession in the Eucharist. And so I do pray that the gratitude just increases for the reality of the real presence. You must be heartened when you do see people coming back, even when there's no Sunday obligation.
Yeah, and they are coming back gradually, and that's very, very good news. Our priests tell us that Ash Wednesday was really turning the corner, and that on Ash Wednesday, the people really came back in droves, and that was a very good sign. And we can see a gradual increase each week. So I go back and forth, to be honest with you, Catherine Jean. Sometimes I think, look, there's going to be revival of the faith. Mm. We're going to have more people turning to the Holy Eucharist and to the sacraments, the sacrament of penance more than ever. At other times I'm worried, is some of the kind of the decline in loyalty to church attendance that we've somberly noted over the last couple decades, is that going to now go down even further as people have gotten out of the habit of going to Mass? I go back and forth, and so do my priests. You were wise too in talking about could this past year have been an occasion of mercy from the Lord? And I think it can be. How many people said to me, Cardinal Dolan, why is God doing this to us? Hmm. And I said, wait a minute. God doesn't cause evil. All right. So God's not doing this to happen. Does he allow a free universe that is fractured by sin at its very core and is imperfect and flawed? Does he allow some of that evil to occur as a result of sin and death and evil that is unfortunately at the core of the universe? Yes, he does. But he always is teaching us something through it. And he will always bring life from death, light from darkness. We can count on that, folks. Might take him a while, but he will do it. So I said, and there's always a whispered invitation in any adversity. Do you remember that constantly repeated refrain in the prophets, Catherine Jean and Dave and listeners, thanks for being here. That constantly repeated refrain, especially prominent in our readings from the Bible during these 40 days of Lent, when the Lord says through the prophets, come back to me with all your heart. Mm. Come back to me with all your heart. Whenever there was war, whenever there was famine, whenever there was sickness, whenever there was a terrible lack of fidelity, whenever there was captivity and exile in the people of Israel, the Lord was always inviting them back. And back they came to a period of revival. So this, of course, my prayer is that people will begin to come back. Now, I don't know if you're hearing it, Catherine Jean. I am. That even with people still being unable with wide latitude to get back to Mass or the sacraments, although thanks be to God, it's increasing. I still hear a lot of people tell me, I've gotten back to the Lord. Mm-hmm. I have rediscovered deep in my heart a spiritual reservoir that I didn't know I had. Mm-hmm. Now, they will tell me, Cardinal Dolan, I want to tell you, my faith has been tested this year of the COVID. And I've often been tested to say, I don't want to believe in a God that would cause this, or I don't know what you're doing to us, Lord. But overwhelmingly, my faith has come through. As I found out, I'm not alone. As I've restarted something I did a long time ago, namely my prayer. As I've turned to God's holy word. As I've reached out with concern and charity to the people around me. as I have intentionally fought off the temptation to feel sorry for myself and to fall into a sense of despondency, as I have used the what's available to me in my parish, in the archdiocese, in tuning in to mass and devotion and faith formation like this, everybody, thanks. They've said to me, we've undergone a revival. And that revival, we think, it's going to bring me back with more fidelity to the sacraments. Now, I do have a fear, Catherine Jean, and you're in media and communications, so I don't know if you would agree with me. Sometimes I worry that we may have been so successful in innovative ways to get to our people. Like every parish now has live stream masses. We have it from St. Patrick's, midnight mass at Christmas, 2 million people tuned in. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Unfortunately, 2 million people didn't contribute. But anyway, that's another issue. Boy, we'd be on easy street, huh? But I'm wondering if some people have gotten so comfortable with that they might say, hey, this is working great. Because that would be counterproductive. Now, I have a lot of esteem for somebody like Joel Osteen. I think he does a good job. We're not into that, all right? We're not into that. Our Catholic faith, and by the way, we're not alone. Our Jewish neighbors feel the same way. But we as Catholics believe that we have a God who became incarnate, who took on flesh, who remains with us in the church and sacraments, and who prefers to deal with us as a community. And he wants us together. God revealed himself to a people. Jesus came to a people. Jesus formed a people. The church, his living mystical body. And he wants us to be together, okay? And that's close to the essence of our faith. There are emergency times when we can't do that. So there's, parish priests and deacons and faithful lay people, they bring Holy Communion all the time to shut-ins and homebound who are unable to get to Mass. Priests would go to anoint them and hear their confessions. But that's an exception. We want to be at Mass. We feel that communal dimension and that sacramental, tactile dimension of our faith. We can taste the Lord. Right? We can hear the Lord, literally, when his word is proclaimed at Mass, when we hear the words of absolution in the confessional. We can hear the Lord. We can sense the Lord's presence in the awe of a church. We can sense the community as we look around and just don't see yellow crime scene tape, that are blocking off the pews, but see one another. And that's that communal dimension of the church that I feel is going to come back like a waterfall when this is all over.
And don't you think, too, Your Eminence, it's so important for us to share this, invite people back to church, invite people to church for the first time. One thing that was so on my heart during this whole last year is the increase in suicides. In June, the CDC said 1 in 4 young people thought about how to kill themselves.
Yeah.
That's just, I can't imagine how it was hard enough with faith. I can't imagine going through this year without faith. And if you were personally dealing with deaths, and I just don't know how people did it.
Yes.
They didn't.
Bingo, Catherine Jean, thank you. The human person must count and depend on something or someone. All right, now that's people of faith or people of no faith. The philosophers, the psychologists, the anthropologists, the poets will tell us the human person must count upon, depend upon some things and someone. Now, we as people of faith gives us that someone and those some things to depend upon. Those without faith, they can find some things and someone to depend upon for a while. But to your point, Catherine Jean Lopez, this past year has removed that from them. All the things that they might usually count on for good things, friends, family, a job, keeping in touch, going out, a couple drinks, fun, or maybe some illicit things that they've been counting upon, okay? Those are gone. They couldn't do it. So as you said, my God, it was tough enough for those of us with faith who did still have someone and something to count upon. It must have been terribly heartbreaking and isolating for those that had nothing. So no wonder we see an upsurge in suicide. No wonder we're worried about, and my medical friends say, an uptick in addiction and alcohol and substance abuse. All right. No wonder we see a rise in toxic, morally toxic things like what do you call it? Technological
pornography and all of these things. Yeah.
Well, so people are desperate. Okay. So for a man or a woman of faith, a man or woman of faith can even get through solitary confinement. Mm. It's difficult. They can get through prison. Look at the eloquent journals from Cardinal George Pell that are coming out now. Look at the prison journals of Father Delp or Dietrich Bonhoeffer or Walter Chiswick. Mm. They can get through because we know that not everything is out there, but reality is in here. And we know that the most real things in life, the most enduring things in life are invisible. They can't be seen. They can't be graphed, okay? So we can fall back on that. So I am wondering, Catherine Jean, if this is going to lead to an increase of faith. I think so. You know, we've had that throughout American history, right?
Right.
I mean, we've had what we call these great awakenings. There were kind of three documented ones in American history. One right before the Revolutionary War, where American historians say it was at the Great Awakening when George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards were preaching, and when the colonists looked around and saw tens of thousands of other people believing what they do, that for the first time they began to say, you know what, we are a people. We are Americans. We are not by ourselves. And that led to the War of Independence. And we had another one. Some of us, you wouldn't, you're too young. Some of us listening might remember the one after the Second World War, remember? Great figures, Billy Graham, Norman Vincent Peale, Fulton Sheen, Father Peyton, President Eisenhower saying, I don't care what church it is, but we need to be going to church on the Sabbath. Congress putting one nation under God in the preamble. That was a great awakening, and I wonder if we're going to have one now. I don't know. Unfortunately, I think, Catherine Jean, and I don't want to get into politics or secular stuff, this is also given a booster shot to those who want to whittle away at the role of religion and culture. And their name is Legion. Their name is Legion. We saw some of that, I'm afraid, in flippant, inaccurate, unjust comments like faith and prayer had nothing to do with this. This is all science. What an insult.
Yeah.
I've yet to meet a medical professional or a researcher who is not credited divine illumination and grace in the accomplishments as we've gotten to. You and I, as Catholics, that faith versus science, that faith versus reason, that's never been a clash for us.
Right.
As our recent pontiffs, especially Pope Benedict, have reminded us, faith and reason are wedded. Faith and reason are God's greatest gift. God's greatest gift to us as human beings is reason. God's greatest supernatural gift is faith. Strange would be the God who would have those clash. So we believe that both are essential, don't we?
We do.
And so the push by what you might call the secularists, who are kind of apprehensive about a revival in religion, also want to see this lead to its decline. And we don't want that to happen.
And again, not to get into politics, but you are chair of the Religious Liberty Commission at the Bishops' Conference. And our mutual friend, Marianne Glendon from Harvard, has said that Catholics in America sometimes have this attitude of being either chameleons or turtles, wanting to blend in or hide and hope that nobody notices us.
Yes.
But isn't this a moment, especially when we had liquor stores open, but not the churches, to say, no, religion is essential, and we're going to show you why. We're going to overwhelm you with the Beatitudes, and we're going to welcome you in. So you can't caricature us. You actually know us.
Yeah. Bingo. Bingo, Catherine Jean, to use a beloved Catholic word. You're right on target. And can I make a confession here? As grateful as I am over the extraordinary attentiveness I can only speak for the Catholic community, the extraordinary attentiveness that the Catholic community gave to the safety and medical requirements. I wonder if a year ago we went too far. And we were kind of scared with everybody else, and we thought, okay, we better bang the door shut. Nobody comes in at all. Now, we gradually tried to think of some ways to get to our people, and as soon as it was possible, boy, we were excited about rabbiting it out of there. But at the beginning, I wonder if can I tell you a little story, Catherine Jean? And I don't think they'd be upset. I got a call a couple weeks into the lockdown from our beloved little sisters of the poor up in the Bronx. They have the magnificent home up there. And they said, Cardinal Dolan, we're not asking your permission, but we just want to alert you to something. And we hope you'll understand. She said, we make a vow. It is an essential part of our vocation that we will be at the bedside of the dying. Mm. And we can't violate that vow. And the state restrictions have now told us that we cannot do that. Now, Sister said, I'm not a rebel here. I run a healthcare facility, and I can assure you we are scrupulous in sanitation and protective garments and masks and distancing and keeping our people isolated. We are stricter than anybody, but we can't obey that one. Mm-hmm. We must be with our people as they're dying. And I said, Mother, you got not only my blessing, but my full-throated encouragement. That was an illustration for me. When I would go to the hospital to see somebody, and where the doctors and nurses, as gracious as could be, would say, we're sorry, you can't go in to see them. Now, they might relent a little and let me stand at the window or something and give them a blessing, just not the same. I want to, again, we're Catholics. I want to touch them. I want to put my hands on them. I want to anoint them. And I wonder if we should have pushed for that. Mm. I wonder if we should have said, I'm sorry, but we're essential workers too. Right. And you're dealing with a person who has a soul. Now, I'm not beating myself up for that, but I wonder if we've learned, I don't know if you were hinting at that or not, but I wonder if we've learned that maybe we caved in a little too early and a little too radically. And that's why I think when things began to open, and when we people of faith saw that we weren't being treated equally, that you can go get your nails done, you can go get a haircut, you can go bowling, but sorry, you can't go to church. We said baloney, right? And we're as essential as that. We had one of my priests said it was right before Christmas, and he said that, well, I stopped in at a liquor store. He said, no, I don't want you. He said, I was just buying some wine for gifts. And he says, I bump into one parishioner after another. They're all there shopping.
Oh.
They were all saying, "Oh, Father, how nice to see you. Boy, we miss Mass. We hope we can come back." And he finally said, I'd had it. He said, "Well, come back. If you're in here,
Right.
this place, these floors haven't been mopped in a month with people picking up the same bottles. We're safe. Get back." I was up in Peekskill a couple of weeks ago for Saturday night Mass, and the two priests said they went to the grocery store and they had they had some cutouts of themselves. And they asked the store owners, whom they knew, and all their parishioners shopped there. They had the two cutouts, and they were holding signs saying, "We're glad you're back to shopping. We'd be even happier if you'd get back to Mass." And they noticed an uptick in attendance. So,
oh, wow. Well, thank you for what you just said for fighting back. You know, I do think that we were being good citizens at the very beginning when no one knew what we were doing. But yeah, I think a lot of people feel that it lasted too long, and I think it's a consolation that you have the same feeling for people. So thank you for that. And one of the reasons that I think that your book is important is because I do think that people feel we're tempted to feel abandoned by the church at times. But gosh, you know, you did all that you could do to be creative in this terrible situation. And I do, not to get too mystical or strange here, but when I received communion at St. Patrick's Cathedral this morning, I happened to be in your line. And when you said body of Christ, I felt like it was Christ saying, "I didn't abandon you," you know, to the church almost, knowing we were having this conversation today. And the fact of the matter is so many priests in this archdiocese and others work so hard to try to reach their people. There were priests who were doing these Facebook Live things, fireside chat like you with us today. People, priests calling parishioners, trying to do so many things, the outdoor confessions and all of these creative things. And one of the things that I appreciated about you during this time, Your Eminence, was you were honest about this wasn't a walk in the park for you. This wasn't a vacation for you. It must have been painful to see an empty cathedral.
It was. I say in there, Catherine, Jean, we've always believed that certain things are necessary for the validity of the Mass. I said, for instance, we can't have Mass without bread and wine. And then I said, now it has dawned on me, we can't really have Mass without our people. Now, I don't want to take that too far. A priest can legitimately say a private Mass, but even in our Catholic understanding, heaven and earth are united. The communion of saints is in every Mass. But it dawned on me how essential our people are to look out, and even to preach, and to look out. Now, when I preach, I don't know how many are listening, but at least they're there. All right. But now you just didn't know who was there. I wonder, Catherine, Jean, I used to make my annual retreat when I was a young priest with a wonderful Jesuit retreat master, and I would try to do the 8-day Ignatian retreat. And we'd always open up the retreat in the same way. He said we would do the exercises, the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, but he would always say, what I want you to do for your first hour of prayer, because you do 4 holy hours, I want you in your first hour of prayer to think back over the last year since your retreat, the ways that God was very present to you. And so I did. And I was amazed at how I could, the litany that I had. And when I got back to the director to reflect on that, he said, yes. And here's his phrase that has always stuck with me. God is most often evident to us in the rear view mirror. Now, you know how when you're driving, very often you'll look and you'll see things that you passed, or you'll see maybe an accident that you barely missed. It's in the rear view mirror as we look back that we see, my God, he was there. Catherine Jean, to take it a step further, at the last day of the spiritual exercises, he would have me list what I was agonizing over, what I was worried about. Okay? And then he didn't ask me any more about that. Until next year, he said, let's get out that list and see what happened to all those worries. And as I would go through them, Catherine Jean, I would end up smiling at them. My God, I was worried about that. It didn't even happen. My God, I can't even I can't even remember being worried about that. And it dawned on me how time levels. We have a God who doesn't wear a wristwatch. We have a God who doesn't keep a calendar. Okay, we do. Okay, most of our listeners right now are saying, "How much longer is this going to go on?" They're they're looking at their watches. Okay, God doesn't, and His time heals, and His time reveals itself, doesn't it? Isn't that why our elders are usually wiser than we are?
Mm.
Because they've got the wisdom of the ages. And isn't that why Holy Mother Church is the wisest of all? Monsignor John Tracy Ellis, the eminent church historian, his courses would be going through one tragedy, one crisis after another in the history of the church. And he would always say, ladies and gentlemen, Holy Mother Church has been through it all before. There's nothing new she hasn't met, okay? Nor have God's people. And that's a consolation. That's the great leveler, isn't it?
A dear friend of mine, Cato Byrne, who you met, who died a few years ago, she said to me one day when some scandal in the church broke out, she said, Catherine, this is just further evidence of the existence of God. You know, we try to mess things up right and left, you know, because we're fallen, and but He remains and He's victorious, and it's why the walk to Easter is so important, isn't it? Because
you bet it is. You bet it is. As we try to replicate those 40 years, that journey from slavery in Egypt to liberation in the Holy Land to new life and promise, that's our Lenten journey of 40 days, from slavery to sin and Satan and death to the liberation of Easter Sunday, only won by the new Moses, Jesus, and only won by His passion and death and resurrection. But when you look at now, the Jewish people would look back on the Exodus, those 40 years, as they will soon next week on Passover, with immense joy and gratitude. But yet the people going through it, it was a terribly difficult time. Every day, you and I in the Divine Office during Lent, almost every day, our first reading is from the Exodus.
Yeah.
And most of the time, they're griping. And most of the time, it's a tragedy, okay? So the beauty of time and looking back in that rearview mirror showed us how God was there and how His grace and mercy was prevailed. But at the time, we often didn't see it. And I'm just wondering if that's what's going to happen because of the lockdown.
Well, and it is an amazing thing to be constantly remembered, as you are in the Exodus readings, that there are people who have suffered before us. You know, it's so easy to get caught up in our own suffering, isn't it?
It is. It is, Catherine Jean. You know what I had earlier today in these days of endless Zoom calls? I had a meeting with my brother bishops of the province of New York. So that those would be the 7 dioceses that come under the Archdiocese of New York, and they're contiguous with the state. We try to do it once a month. Sometimes we have business. More often it's like show and tell. We just kind of let one another know what's going on. But you know who I always invite, Catherine Jean? And I should invite him because he lives here he lives in Brooklyn, is Bishop Gregory Monsoor. Now, you know Bishop Gregory Monsoor. I invite him because he's a great friend. I invite him because he's a source of wisdom and holiness. But I also invite him because when we start rehearsing all the headaches we got with the COVID, with the decline in attendance, with the worry about people coming back, with the financial problems, with all the lawsuits we got against us, all right? the date. Half of our diocese is declaring chapter 11. When we are tempted to become citizens of Pity City, all I'll do is say, Bishop Monsoor, how are things in Lebanon?
Yeah.
And when he tells us about the torture and the trauma of Lebanon, we're all reminded about the sufferings of the Church Universal. And we're reminded that other places are even struggling more. Yeah. Poor Lebanon, today he filled us in on the turmoil and the corruption and the hunger that's going on there. So that's what you were talking about, that reminder of suffering elsewhere.
I confess, he of course is the Maronite, right? And I went to his midnight mass this year, in part because I was so brokenhearted about the death of our friend Andrew Walther, who worked on religious liberty issues and was close to the bishop. But also to be reminded that the Christians in that part of the world suffer so much. We were reminded that during the Pope's visit to Iraq again. Yeah. And there is something so beautiful about the Maronite rite. It's so catechetical, and it just reminds you who you are, And so I'm grateful to hear that. It does help with perspective for sure.
Did you see the piece in the Wall Street Journal this morning on the op-ed page about the Holy Father's trip to Iraq? How moving, how powerful it was. So
it really was.
Glad to see that. Yeah,
me too. I keep encouraging people to read the homilies and addresses because they were so beautiful, and they were almost like a pilgrimage for us too.
Sure. You bet it was.
Do you worry, Your Eminence, that people, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, that people don't appreciate the power of baptism and the indwelling presence? God never leaves us. The indwelling presence of the Trinity. It's amazing, awesome. And I don't know if we think about it all the time. And I think of all the fallen away Catholics there are, right? Who don't realize that they have this tremendous grace that they can tap into whenever they choose to,
Oh boy, because you've had to listen to me enough. Very often I will preach about our doctrine of sanctifying grace. Mm-hmm. Sanctifying grace. I don't think we don't preach it enough, and we don't savor it enough. You probably heard me tell this story before, Catherine Jean, but when I was a young priest, I was in Immaculata Parish in Richmond Heights in the Archdiocese of St. Louis. And I had a professor of mathematics at nearby Washington University come to see me, and he said, "Can I talk to you about the Catholic faith?" He said, "I don't want to give you the wrong idea. I'm not joining. I'm just kind of curious." I said, "Sure, come on in." So we began to meet weekly, and he was really a tough nut to crack because just by upbringing and all, as a rigorous academic and all, he was just questioning everything. And gradually he began to come around. And gradually, through the grace of God, he said, "I think I want to become a Catholic." And we went through the whole instructions, Catherine. And at the last session, I said, "Well, your baptism's coming up." And I said, "Are you at peace? Is there anything about the wisdom and the teaching of the church that you don't understand?" And he said, "Well, actually, there is one thing that's bothered me for a long time." And I said, "Well, speak now or forever hold your peace." I'm thinking what, Catherine Jean? I'm thinking he's going to have a problem with the real presence of our Lord in the Eucharist, the effectiveness of the sacrament of penance, the role of the Blessed Mother, perhaps the position of the successor of St. Peter, Holy Father. The regular things that people outside the church have a tough time understanding. He says to me, to my joy, he said, "A long time ago when we started these instructions, you talked to me about something called sanctifying grace." And he said, "If I understood you right, you said that meant that God actually lived and dwelt in the heart and soul of the believer. that God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the most blessed Trinity, would make their home within me in the deepest recesses of my being and would stay with me. He said, I thought I heard you say that, but I obviously misunderstood you. Because he said, that's just too good to be true. And I said to him, well, you understood me just right. And I said, it almost does seem too good to be true. And I said, I don't think we could ever believe it, except that Jesus revealed it to us. Mm-hmm. He told us that. He said, I said, we call his teaching the good news. Well, if that ain't good news, I don't know what is. That's sanctifying grace. That's why, who has that beautiful prayer, Catherine Jean, was the famous Cardinal Mercier.
Oh, yes.
The great, oh my, he really was the great patriot of Belgium that led Belgium through the terrors of the First World War. He was an extraordinarily keen intellect, a great scholar of St. Thomas Aquinas. He brought a revival to the church after the horrors of the First World War at the Catholic University of Louvain. And he had this beautiful prayer that he gave to the people of Belgium during the horrors of the war. And he starts off by saying, when God seems distant, when God seems absent, enter into the sanctuary of your baptized soul, where God dwells. Now, those words are all we need. Enter into the sanctuary of your baptized soul, where God dwells. That's what our people have been doing this last year. That's what I meant earlier when I talked about people recovering their spiritual elan. And many of them would say, when I didn't know what else to do, I just kind of sat down breathless and took a deep breath and closed my eyes and said, God, I don't know what's going on, but I sure believe you're here. And I believe that you're within me. And I believe that if I stay close to you, things are going to work out. I said, sweetheart, that's a prayer that's more powerful than any of the others you may have said. And more of our people got to that, didn't they?
Being a New York City girl growing up in Manhattan in the projects, I never really saw sunsets and sundowns, and I had a whole new appreciation for them. And just the days I was saying, God, where are you? There's no way these beautiful sundowns can exist without God.
Yeah, how true. How true. Yeah. Yeah. Somebody told me, Catherine Jean, and you would appreciate this since you're such a fan of America's Parish Church, St. Patrick's Cathedral, that one day they were asking that. And they were on an empty bus going to an empty work. They're an essential worker. And they saying, God, where are you? And on Fifth Avenue, they drove by St. Patrick's, and he turned around thinking to see the doors closed. And at least the big glass doors were open. And he said, all of a sudden I looked in and I saw the altar and I could see the cross. And I could see the sanctuary lamp in the back. Wow. And he just said, thank you, God. Thanks for what he had just said, dear God, where are you? And he said,
right here.
Thanks for sledgehammering me back into reality.
It's amazing how kind God is to us when, he already died for us. And then yet he still gives us these signs and consolations. It's amazing. Your Eminence has, you talk about in the book and in some of these sermons how in times of crisis, we find ourselves praying more, crying out to God, quite literally. Has your prayer changed over the course of this year?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Look, I'm 71, so I kind of have developed a regimen, a routine of prayer, and that's good for us. Just like we're supposed to develop a regimen of approach to our responsibilities, a regimen of exercise, which I could do better. And, just a regimen of life is good for health. So I need a regimen of prayer. So my prayers in the morning and evening are usually predictable. I would usually depend on the divine office, spiritual reading, the rosary, but certain prompts to meditation. But I added something when this all started, simply to have another gap in the time I was trying to devote to prayer, where I would say to the Lord, what am I missing? Where is the emptiness? And who are the people about whom I am concerned? So my prayer changed, and those three became very, very important, especially the emptiness. Do you know, Catherine Jean, in the book, and even before it was put in book form, the sermon that got the most attention, and I was very edified, was Easter Sunday, when I spoke about emptiness, the empty tomb. Okay. And I said, isn't it strange talking about emptiness on Easter? Because Easter is supposed to be about fullness. And Easter is supposed to be about life. Easter is supposed to be about joy. Easter is supposed to be about the abundance of God's mercy and grace and gifts. And here I am talking about emptiness. What's gotten into me? And I said, except folks, none of those can fill us until we are empty. Mm-hmm. I said, that's what Lent is all about, to empty ourselves of anything that prohibits God from filling us, correct? Mm-hmm. How many people right now are getting their gardens ready for the spring? And the first thing they got to do is empty the plot of ground from the rocks and the weeds and the sticks so that the seed can go and come to life. Emptiness is an extraordinarily important and essential part of the recipe of spiritual growth leading to genuine discipleship. And if this past year hasn't given us a sense of emptiness, I don't know what will.
Right. Well, and that's why it's so important, and why I think your book is important, this collection from the lockdown period, because if we don't take the right lessons from this, the suffering would have been in vain, and I actually was crying as I was rereading that, remembering the point that God got me to during that shutdown, where I surrender. I got nothing. I got nothing without you.
Well, Catherine Jean, is that not another insight? I was very moved. Most of the time, we're used to turning on the news and finding experts giving us the answers. I was extraordinarily moved when I turn on and when I would hear physicians and researchers and health officials say, we don't know. Mm. We don't quite know what this is about. We know it's dangerous. We don't quite comprehend it. We don't know what virus there is to counteract. We don't quite know what we have to do. Now, as haunting as that was, I found that so refreshing.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden, a society tempted to be know-it-alls turned into people saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And a culture attempted to consider ourselves omnipotent was forced to admit we are really useless.
Yeah.
We are really helpless. And that's not a bad place to be in the spiritual life.
Right, right. It is, there's so much pain and death, but to realize what the meaning of our life is, again, why religion is so essential, because it doesn't make any sense without it, right? Without God. This can be such a blessing if we take the right lessons from it. We have to wrap up in a minute or two. Your Eminence, any advice for people who are at this point? We're about to enter the Passion Tide. You've got about 2 weeks left to make a difference. What's your advice?
Well, look, the counsel that we're given at this period of Lent any year is amplified this year. This is the time what are we? We're not quite at the seventh inning stretch yet of Lent, but we're getting close. We just had Laetare Sunday, and now a week from this Sunday will be Palm Sunday. The end is near, so perseverance and steadfastness. Mother Teresa, remember, she said, God's not going to ask us if we've been successful. He is going to ask us if we've been faithful. Faithful. That means persevering. That means steadfast. That means keeping at it. All right. So that we want to do in these last 2.5 weeks of Lent, but we want to do it throughout the virus. Okay. And when the end comes, and when we shout out a universal Te Deum, a great act of praise to God for being with his people, we don't want to forget the lessons that we've learned. Our Jewish neighbors teach us that every Passover, they remember. They are not going to let their children forget. Every single Mass we say, we repeat the words of Jesus at his Last Supper, that first Holy Thursday, do this in memory of me. We're tempted to a spiritual amnesia. We're tempted today to an historical amnesia. We got people trying to erase the past, which is terribly deadly. Because if we human beings don't have memory, and if we don't have dreams, we are animals, right? So don't forget what we've been through. We're eager to get over it and get on with life. We're going to be talking to our kids and grandkids about this the rest of our lives. Like my mom and dad did about the Depression. Like my grandparents did about the flu epidemic in 1918. Like my dad did about World War II. We're going to be talking about it for a long time, because the lessons learned in hardship are the most valuable of all.
That common experience of vulnerability and really brings us to a deeper humility. Please God, continue to let it. Your Eminence, thank you so much for this time. Thank you. Well, thank you too for the Sheen Center, because it's about, obviously these are difficult times. A theater, any building that is gathering people, but the vision for it to really bring Christ to the people with the arts and through creativity and beauty is really a beautiful vision that so many of us pray can continue. So thank you for that gift.
Thank you, and thanks to you and Dave for keeping it so promising. And Catherine Jean, you did see my pastoral letter that was posted today, that'll be in the Catholic New York and distributed to our people through flock notes on St. Joseph, and especially this patron of a happy death, us coming together to make sure that physician-assisted suicide does not become the law of this state and the law of this land. If anything, this pandemic has taught us is this: we saw all of society united to save a life.
Yeah.
And the dignity of the human person, the sacredness of human life. We don't want a pandemic of suicides. So,
and I pray that this year really gives us this renewed appreciation for life.
Let's hope so.
All the stages.
You got it.
Thank you, Your Eminence.
Thank you all. Happy Feast of St. Joseph. Happy Lent and Holy Week and Easter.
Thank you for the book. I am with you. Lessons of Hope and Courage in Times of Crisis.
All right. If I could just add to that, Catherine Jane, you mentioned about bringing Christ to the people. Your Eminence, probably reading over this book, the image of this past year that I remember the most, and that hopefully I will tell my children and grandchildren about, was just about a year ago during a Holy Week, when you brought the Blessed Sacrament out onto Fifth Avenue and the doors opened, that amid that desolation that we're all talking about, what a powerful reminder that Christ was still there with us.
You're kind to remember that, Dave. And would we ever forget the Holy Father on a rainy, dreary, dark Roman night in an empty St. Peter's Square doing the same thing with the Blessed Sacrament? I'll never forget that.
The light continues to try to the darkness continues to overcome the light, but it won't. Your Eminence, thank you for being with us today on this Feast of St. Joseph's. Thank you for the gift of the Sheen Center. Thank you for this wonderful book. And I think I speak for most New Yorkers to thank you for your pastoral leadership and for inspiring hope and courage during this time of crisis, and also for the many priests and religious who also acted heroically without fanfare.
Couldn't do it without you. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you to the National Review. And most of all, thank you to our viewers. Please, again, we remind you to like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, click the bell for future notifications. And if you're able, please consider making a donation to the Sheen Center. If you want to find a listing of all our events, it's at sheencenter.org. On behalf of the Sheen Center, I wish you all a blessed rest of your Lent, a blessed Holy Week, and a happy Easter. And until next time, stay safe, be well, God bless.